On the 6th of September 2025, two boys aged 12 and 15 were walking home from basketball practice in Cobble Bank, an outer suburb of Melbourne, when they were chased and set upon by a group of assailants who then hacked them to death with machetes. 7 teenagers have since been arrested and charged with murder. This double murder has become a flashpoint in the city's ongoing crime wave. A surge in violent crime and property crime is afflicting this city, still regularly but less credibly listed among the world's most livable. The youth of the victims and the alleged attackers, their shared Sudanese background, and the possibility that the violence is gang-related have raised inevitable questions about youth offending, policing, and multiculturalism. Reports that the arrestees include a young man photographed just months earlier brandishing a machete at a suburban shopping mall have reignited the debate about Victoria's bail laws and precipitated a ban on machetes. Large bins have been placed across the city in the hope that the budding duelists will voluntarily surrender their weapons. The Melbourne crime wave is the most visible manifestation of endemic disorder created by Victoria's long-standing Labor government, which has been in power for all but 4 years since 1999. A city that endured the world's longest COVID lockdowns is now beset by crime, largely because changes to the criminal justice system have paid more attention to the interests of offenders than to those victims or the law-abiding public. At the same time, the city is straining under infrastructure and cost of living pressures driven by incessant immigration. Its population has grown by more than 350,000 since the pandemic, and a productivity collapse due to, in part, COVID-era excesses. Unpacking and resolving Melbourne's crime wave, then, requires a fuller understanding of the decline of the city. Let's look at the crime wave by numbers. Between June 2024 and June 2025, the state of Victoria has seen a 16.3% increase in the criminal incident rate and a 13.8% increase in the offence rate across the state. For the city of Melbourne, the increase in the offence rate over that period was more than 10%, primarily driven by increases in thefts from motor vehicles and retail theft. The latest reported rate for the city is lower now than 10 years ago, but this is misleading in 2 ways. First, a rise in the absolute number of crimes is bad by itself. It changes perceptions of crime and safety, and it places strain on police and other services. Second, crime has risen markedly across some inner suburbs beyond the central business district over the past 10 years. The politics of this last point are significant. Some of the largest increases in crime have been in Melbourne's wealthier suburbs, the historical heartland of the opposition Liberal Party. The city of Stonington, for example, which includes Melbourne's most famous enclave of rich people, Toorak, has seen a 20% increase in offending since June 2024. This raises the salience of crime for Liberal voters, along with larger questions about the changes these areas are undergoing and why. The other alarming trend is the rise in youth offending to the highest level on record. Young people are disproportionately represented in the categories most driving the crime wave, including thefts and burglaries. Police have also flagged that a small number of repeat offenders among younger cohorts are committing multiple offences. Among these youth offenders, there is also an unavoidable, if uncomfortable, question about their ethnic backgrounds. Sudanese gangs have been linked to up to 30 killings in the past 5 years. Getting a clear picture of the rate of youth offending among this community is difficult. Since 2015, the number of unique alleged offenders in the 10 to 17-year-old cohort has remained stable, but the percentage who were recorded as Australian-born has fallen from 84% to 67%, while the number whose country of birth is recorded as unspecified has risen from 7% to 27%. Moreover, Australian-born status is increasingly unrevealing about ethnic background because of large-scale demographic changes in the city. The problem is substantial enough that some criminal justice specialists have proposed the creation of an African court to administer a culturally specific diversion program akin to the Koori Court for Indigenous Victorians. The crime wave as something new. Apart from the amount of crime increasing, Melbourne has also seen new patterns of crime emerge, And it is not just children sword fighting in the street. For example, the surge of thefts across Melbourne and its suburbs is, in part, because of criminal syndicates, sometimes comprising international students stealing baby formula and medicines. Earlier this year, Victoria Police estimated that up to 70% of the rise in retail theft is attributable to repeat offenders operating in this organised way. More spectacularly, carjackings, all but unheard of previously, have become regular events. In one recent incident, teenagers allegedly crashed a stolen car and then stole the car of a woman who stopped to help. Elsewhere, a spree of car thefts were allegedly committed by a group of teenagers. There are now reportedly about 9 carjackings a week. Police believe 70% of those responsible are under the age of 25. There is also a thriving black market in tobacco, incentivized by federal tax increases, which has led to a spate of arson attacks and extortion. And speaking of arson, someone recently tried to burn down a synagogue with about 20 people inside amid a surge of anti-Semitism. Victoria as an outlier. Importantly, Victoria's crime problem is largely its own. New South Wales, where Sydney is the capital, has also seen a recent increase in retail thefts and sexual assault reports, up 5.1% and 8.8% respectively over 2 years. But it has seen declines in crimes like theft from motor vehicles and breaking and entering. Queensland, home of the 2032 Olympics host city, Brisbane, has seen falls in robbery and unlawful entry. New South Wales has seen a rise in the number of youth in detention, but Queensland's most recent figures found a reduction in youth offending. Neither state has quite the same controversy about surging crime, youth gangs, and violent robberies and carjackings. Clearly, the choices of the Victorian government have played a role in creating the crime wave. In 2023, the government amended bail laws to reduce the use of remand by effectively making bail the default position for a range of offences. This law entrenched standard practice for the Victorian judiciary, which, after a generation in power, is mostly Labor appointees. Across 2022 to 2024, magistrates granted bail around 70% of the time, and the rate was similar in the Supreme Court. During that time, the number of unsentenced prisoners in Victoria fell by about 25%. So while the government has recently reversed its bail leniency and pivoted towards a community safety message, this is largely an exercise in chasing its own tail and may not overcome the judiciary's revealed preferences. Just weeks after the Cobble Bank incident, a judge in Victoria bailed a 15-year-old accused of multiple armed robberies, car thefts, and threats to kill so that he could travel to Europe with his family. The role of criminal justice reform. The decision to reduce incarceration was not made in a vacuum. Before the pandemic, there had been concerns that the prison population was rising at an unsustainable rate, with taxpayers facing the cost of building new prisons. Indeed, a new prison will be opened this year, built at a cost of 1.1 billion Australian dollars. The idea of criminal justice reform was that non-violent offenders could be better punished by a combination of community service, home detention, and other restrictions on their liberties. It was an idea popular enough that even Donald Trump signed a criminal justice reform law. However, there was always the risk that, if reform was just about reducing incarceration, the government could simply let people out of prison, and this is what it has done. In December 2024, Victoria's incarceration rate fell to 107 per 100,000 people. This was far lower than any other Australian state. New South Wales's rate was 192 at that time, Queensland's 251, and Victoria's was one of the lowest rate in the developed world, down from a high 157 per 100,000 in 2019. In 2020, Victoria and many other states reduced their prison populations during the pandemic on public health grounds, and Victoria's has remained at that lower level. The fall has not only been among unsentenced prisoners, but among convicted criminals too. Moreover, statistics on sentenced prisoners' most serious offences reveal that since the prison population peaked in 2019, incarceration has become less common for not only non-violent offences, but also for some offences that more obviously threaten community safety. Between 2019 and 2024, there were falls in the number of people incarcerated for manufacturing or cultivating cannabis, fraud, and non-motor vehicle theft, like those organised retail theft gangs. But the largest reductions were seen among those convicted of violent and threatening crimes, breaching community orders and violence and non-violence orders, robbery and extortion, and assault. Overall, the sentenced prisoner population has fallen by more than 1,200 persons since 2019, largely driven by leniency towards violent criminals and invasive property crimes. This is not what criminal justice reformers had in mind. In hindsight, it was naive to expect that this government would adopt pragmatic reforms rather than hew to ideology. Because Victoria is not just crime-ridden, it has been corrupted. Victoria's crime wave is a problem of permissiveness towards favoured, marginalised groups and overbearing tactics towards law-abiding citizens who might object. The result has been a breakdown in law and order, combined with extraordinary growth in the government's scale and reach. The Victorian government has blown its budget on expanding the public service and big-ticket infrastructure projects. It accrued debts of more than 150 billion Australian dollars and lost its AAA credit rating, with further downgrades possible. All of this has been in the service of a vision of transformative change, which has two main priorities. First, the centrepiece of the government's cultural agenda is the elevation of Indigenous rights. School days and government meetings now begin with an acknowledgement of country, and government brochures refer to the city as Naarm. The government has recently passed a treaty law which will create a representative body for Indigenous people with special rights to influence policymaking. Its ambitions include targets related to reducing the overrepresentation of Indigenous Victorians in the state's prisons, a motivation for the government's previous weakening of bail laws too. Second, the government has spent vast sums on infrastructure. While some of this has been needed, it has mostly been delivered over budget amid widespread concerns about corruption in the Labor-affiliated building union. And some of it seems ideologically driven. The suburban rail loop is a proposed subway that will link areas marked for high-rise development to accommodate the city's migrant populations. Not coincidentally, the previous premier, recently spotted at a Chinese military parade, signed up to China's Belt and Road Initiative, while the current premier recently toured that country to promote investment in the line and associated property development opportunities. These two policies are linked. The former is used as a cudgel to bully public acquiescence to the latter. Indeed, Melburnians are subjected to a barrage of state propaganda. Public buildings and public transport are regularly decorated for various causes touted by the government, which also never fails to credit itself on signage around public works. The ultimate point of the transformation is redistribution of people, voters, crime, and the quality of life itself. Consider, for example, that the rising crime in Melbourne's established suburbs has been precipitated, at least in part, by their densification, a trend the government has announced it will accelerate as it seeks to build affordable homes in areas people want to live in. This trend has already seen the Liberal Party chased out of these suburbs as federal electorates. It promises to render them utterly irrelevant, assuming it has not already done so. Disorder is the best way to understand all of this. Some institutions are losing or abandoning their authority, while others are overstepping theirs as the state is repurposed towards the narrow ends of government. This is a two-tier justice system created to redistribute goods across society. It is just winner-picking. The process has not yet been completed. Recent independent reviews have attempted to address opaque decision-making and politicization in the public service, but it is advanced, including in criminal justice. Putting things back in order. Among criminal justice reformers, a common line is that it is better to be smart on crime than tough on crime. But sometimes being tough is the smart choice. This is not a new observation, but halting the crime wave starts with policing. There is evidence that the pandemic laws weaken people's trust in Victoria Police, an effect which, according to polls, seems to have persisted. Trust in the police is generally correlated with police effectiveness and public cooperation. Rebuilding that trust might begin with targeting policing and engagement to areas in which crime occurs or originates. Far from merely displacing crime, targeted policing has a positive effect on neighbouring areas. This should be understood as needs-based policing, recognising, as in Cobble Bank, that the law-abiding people in these areas of whatever ethnic or cultural background are those most in need of police protection. Another good place to start would be cleaning up the streets. In the 1990s, New York City famously employed a broken windows strategy, the basic idea of which was that cracking down on small crimes would prevent and deter criminals from committing larger ones. Melbourne has become a dirty, unkempt place. Public spaces are covered in litter and defaced with graffiti. Clean it up and enlist some non-violent offenders to help. Beyond policing, though, for Melbourne to recover, more people will have to go to prison. There is no good reason for Victoria to have fewer people in prison for serious crimes now than it had before 2020, especially not when the city has grown so rapidly. Reformers can be comforted by the simple truth that no one really cares about the costs of prisons anyway. Even the government now admits this with its messaging. The test for criminal justice policy ultimately has always been community safety. Criminal justice is fundamental to the state. It is the one function that, more or less, everyone agrees the state must perform. The hope is that in getting criminal justice right, the next government, whenever it comes, might be able to undertake the harder work of undoing the corruption of the state and making Melbourne livable again. Thanks for listening or watching. This essay was written by Andrew Bushnell, a researcher from Melbourne. He's written widely on criminal justice and holds a PhD in political philosophy from the University of Melbourne. It was published in Quillette on the 11th of October 2025, and it was read by me, Zoe Booth. Please head to quillette.com for more fantastic essays. Thanks for watching.